Structural engineers say steel reinforcement can deform to keep buildings from instantaneous collapse, but many of Turkey's structures appear to have been largely concrete, although Turkey has building codes very much in line with North American standards.
But were those building codes enforced? And that's the real question being asked, as scores of structures have collapsed following one of the strongest earthquakes in Turkey in recent years. Now, here's an explanation of Turkey's building codes, how they came about, and then I'll explain how corruption pretty much mitigates the very codes that they discuss in this video.
After the 1999 quake in northwest Turkey, which killed more than 17,000 people, investigations found many construction faults, including the use of corrosive beach sand in concrete. Turkey reacted by updating building regulations several times, most recently in 2018. But look at this image of the Turkish town of Izlahiye, particularly this white building over here. Google Street View shows it was still being constructed in 2020, the weight of the floors suspended above a large empty shop space. Now that is a difficult design to survive an earthquake. And despite the regulations, recent satellite image appear to show that it completely collapsed. The same is true for several recently constructed buildings on this street. Elsewhere, advertisements have circulated appearing to show buildings claiming to comply with regulations, buildings which collapsed. It's these kind of examples that some suggest show codes weren't tightly enforced.
And the reason why they're not tightly enforced is because there's something known as construction amnesties that provide loopholes for developers so they don't have to necessarily follow those codes. Older buildings that were built prior to the codes passing also do not have to abide by the new codes and retrofit the buildings to withstand some of these stronger earthquakes. So some of these construction amnesties are effectively legal exemptions for the payment of a fee. So if the developers just pay a little fee, then they don't have to abide by the building codes, and the structures that fell as a result of the earthquake is what has contributed to this insanely high death toll. As of this morning, the number was around 33,000. It's going to continue to climb, of course. And the Turkish justice minister said Sunday that some 131 people were under investigation for their alleged responsibility in the construction of buildings that failed to withstand the quakes. But if the loophole is baked into the system, I mean, they're gonna take advantage of the loophole, and it seems like that's what's happening here.
Yeah, there's several different problems here. And guys, this isn't just about Turkey, this is about America and all across the world. There's a reason why we have regulations, because they are rules meant to protect you. You could argue that all of our laws are regulations. Don't rob people, don't murder people, those are regulations. Hey, when you're building a building, make sure that it is earthquake proof, especially on a giant fault line, because that is the equivalent of getting those people killed if you don't. And that's exactly what happened here. So now, there are the old buildings that need to be retrofitted. Oh boy, in Turkey, that is a hell of a process, and a lot of them are not. I'll give you the numbers in a second. And then there's the new buildings that were built since the 1999 devastating earthquake that killed 18,000 people in the western part of the country, right? And overall, in 2018, the calculation, 50% of the buildings in Turkey, that is 13 million buildings, are not up to code. They will not survive earthquakes. That's half the buildings in the country, and there's two massive fault lines that Turkey's on top of, and a third one arguably as well. So when you do an exemption for a code so that you don't have to have the building be able to survive an earthquake, it won't survive an earthquake. So I don't understand how anyone could justify an exemption for any building, period, especially in Turkey, where there's fault lines everywhere, right? Absolutely unacceptable for one building, let alone the thousands and thousands of buildings they gave exemptions to. Why? Money, it's always about the money. And one more thing about that, the Turkish government has been collecting an earthquake tax since 1999 just for a situation just like this. And there's at a minimum $4.6 billion that is built up into that fund. A lot of Turks paid tons of taxes into that fund. Erdogan now says, I don't know where it is.
Of course, of course.
I don't know.
Honestly,
yeah, by the way, I'll tell you where it is. It's in his goddamn pocket. Not all of it, but a lot of it. Him and his stupid cronies and his family. And if you say that in Turkey, by the way, you'll be arrested. So that's the kind of tyrant that Erdogan is.
In '94, when there was a pretty big earthquake in Northridge, California, they passed new building regulations related to what's referred to as dingbat apartment buildings. And they're apartment buildings where they have the carport like right underneath the very first floor of the apartments, which isn't the most secure structure in an area where you're likely to get earthquakes. And so now all of those buildings have had to be retrofitted as a result of new regulations, but there is no construction amnesty there. All landlords, mom and pop landlords, it doesn't matter. All of them had to shell out a ton of cash to retrofit their buildings, and that was the right thing to do. Those are the right regulations to ensure that people don't die when an earthquake happens and their housing collapse as a result of that quake. Now, as I mentioned, in regard to Turkey, the death toll from the 7.8 magnitude and 7.5 magnitude quakes that hit southeastern Turkey and northern Syria 9 hours apart on February 6th rose to 33,179 on Sunday and was certain to keep increasing as search teams locate more bodies in the rubble. I should note that some reports indicated that as many as 36,000 people have been reported dead. The other thing I want to mention is it's fascinating because it appears the government here is trying to deflect and place all of their blame on the developers. For instance, 12 people have been arrested already. As I mentioned, 131 people total are already under investigation for alleged responsibility in the construction of the buildings. But again, I mean, if there's a loophole, the builders are gonna take advantage of the loophole. And the fish rots from the head down. If the government has those loopholes in place, how are you gonna pretend like you are not at fault in any way, shape, or form? That's insane.
100%. In fact, right before the earthquake, the Turkish parliament was considering more building amnesties, code amnesties. Well, I mean, just like here in America, of course, the politicians are super corrupt, right? And so now they've arrested those people. Are some of them guilty? Yeah, it's entirely possible that they are, right? And did they cheat so they can make more money, not caring that 33,000 people will die because they wanted to have an extra boat and an extra car, right? Yeah, that might definitely be the case. Or by the way, they could be scapegoats. And that's the problem with corruption. Once you have a tyrant like Erdogan, you don't know what's true and what's not true. It could be that it's 12 guys he really doesn't like. It's 12 guys who are the most innocent. It's 12 guys who are part of other political factions he doesn't like. You know what this guy did? In the middle of the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, in the first 24 hours, when communication was the most important, he cut off Twitter. But people were organizing on Twitter and coordinating to rescue people. Why did he cut off Twitter? Because one journalist criticized him. And he had that guy arrested, okay? Turkey, if you're getting confused here, Turkey's supposed to be a democracy. But sometimes in a democracy, tyrants like Erdogan come in and they strangle the democracy until there's almost nothing left. It's exactly what Trump wanted to do and had started to do. And it's what Netanyahu's doing in Israel. We literally did a story about it today. The right wingers are saying all across the world. I'm gonna give you one piece of hope here in a second, but first, two more pieces of bad news. Of course, Erdogan comes in and says, oh, my opponents are politicizing the issue. Let's not politicize this. Whenever people commit political crimes, they then immediately say, don't politicize. Don't politicize. And by the way, they're the first guys to politicize things that aren't even political for their own benefit. So just a monster through and through. You know what else he said? He said, well, maybe it's fate. Oh, no, your job wasn't to protect them. Your job was to take tons and tons, billions of dollars in bribes while all those people died that were your citizens that you were supposed to protect, and afterwards you go, maybe it was fate. Okay, these guys are monsters. Okay. And the second horrible news is, if you think Turkey's in bad shape, nobody can even get to Syria. So for so long, the roads were closed. The Bashar al-Assad government is filled with monsters, and that fish rots from the head down too. So nobody can even get to rescue the poor Syrians. At least there's aid in Turkey. All right, finally the good news. Yes, you're gonna see some of those videos and they're wonderful, but remember, they're a tiny percentage of the folks being pulled out of the buildings. 6 days later, an 88-year-old woman rescued a 6-year-old rescued, children, families, a pregnant woman, families buried together. And this is one heartbreaking, every story is heartbreaking, but one guy survived all those days, and they said, how about the others? Because he had been hearing them throughout. He said, I stopped hearing them 3 days ago. And so they were in there. They were in there for 3 days. They could have been rescued. But by the way, Erdogan didn't want to use the military because he's not sure the military's on his side. What a terrible, terrible human being. All right, but some of the rescues were done with joint Turkish and Italian forces, joint Turkish and German forces, and also the first time the Armenian-Turkish border has been opened in 35 years, and that was so that more aid could come in. So God bless both governments for making that happen. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, we really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.